Hey, all, it's me, JSB, and today I'm talking Chicago, one of my favorite bands of all time. And what I'm doing is looking through the Spotify rankings and seeing what the big Chicago songs are in the 21st century, and whether I think it's a good overview of what they're all about, or if there's other places that people should go to hear Chicago. I suspect the latter is going to be the answer because I fear that when I look into their top five and top 10 songs, it's mostly going to be the 80s ballads because people really seem to believe that Chicago were bigger in the 80s than they ever were, but it's just not true. They were one of the biggest bands of the 70s by far, five consecutive number one albums, tons of big hit singles, and they weren't all ballads. They had a couple. If You Leave Me Now was kind of the template for what they do in the 80s, and that came out in 76. And I'm sure that's going to be on the list. Um, but there's just so much more to them. They were a driving rock band with great horn section, one of the greatest guitarists of all time in the form of Terry Kath, and three great vocalists, Terry himself, Peter Cetera, and Robert Lamb, all of whom also wrote, along with Jimmy Pankow in the horn section, and to a lesser degree, Lee Loughnane as well. Um, Fabulous band, as I say, massively underrated. Are people even still listening to Chicago? I would really hope so, but I'm not sure that they've reached the younger generation in a way that some other bands have, because even if it's only one song, Journey have Don't Stop Believing, Toto have Africa, and these make them name bands amongst all the generations. Anyway, let's have a look at Spotify and see just how they are stacking up in 2025. Okay, here we go. Before I click in, let's see if I can predict what's going to be the top five. As I've said, If You Leave Me Now, a dead cert. Probably got to say Hard to Say I'm Sorry is going to be in there. Uh, Hard Habit to Break, probably. Really hope that at least 25 or 64 is still up there from the early days. Maybe Saturday in the Park would scrape in. I mean, that was one of their biggest 70s hits. In fact, their second biggest after If You Leave Me Now. Well, we shall see. Let's see how my predictions stack up. Okay, so they've got 12 million monthly listeners. Not too shabby. And sure enough, number one is If You Leave Me Now. I mean, no wonder this was their biggest hit ever, number one all around the world, except New Zealand, where it only made it to number two. What can I tell you? Anyway, this has over 500,000,000 streams, which is actually more than I was expecting for any Chicago song. So it's doing better than I thought. What else do we have in the top five, though? Okay, yeah, 80s ballad territory, as I feared. These are great 80s ballads, don't get me wrong, but it's not, I don't want to use the phrase proper Chicago, but if you're a 70s Chicago fan, you know what I mean. But you're the inspiration, hornless Peter Cetera ballad, but it's good. I do like it. Hard to say I'm sorry / get away. I mean, only 300, I was going to say 1,000, only 300 million streams on that. But hey, at least they're getting the horns at the end with the getaway section. Okay, so I said hard to say I'm sorry was going to be in the top five. I didn't expect it to be in there twice. So we got this full album version, which segues into the upbeat at the end, which I'm tempted to sing for you, but I'm not going to. But then they've also got clearly the single version where it sort of fades out just before it gets interesting, and that's not far behind. But yeah, number five, Saturday in the Park. I thought 25 or 64 would be the oldest song or representing the old style Chicago, but that was my second best guess. And yeah, the top five itself, well, it's mostly ballads and two of the same ballads. So not too much variety in there. But if we expand to the top 10 by clicking see more, what else will we find? We will find 25 or 64. There we go. 142 million. It should be much higher than that. That should be one of the classic rock staples that everybody knows and everybody still plays. Scorching Terry Kath solo on it. Great riff, great vocal from Peter Cetera. Signature song. They still, I believe, encore with it to this day. But then more 80s ballads. Hard Habit to Break, Will You Still Love Me, which is, of course, the first big hit they had with Jason Sheff coming in to replace Peter Cetera, but still 80s ballad territory. 9 and 10, even worse 80s ballad territory. Bill Champlin led once. This is two tracks here from 1988's Chicago 19, which was really their last big selling album. But while it sold well, it was not a Chicago album. It had, well, these two don't have horns on them at all. They barely have any members of the band on them, apart from Bill Champlin. And fortunately, the brilliant Danny Serafin on drums and what would turn out to be his swan song with the band, sadly. But even these, I mean, Look Away was the biggest song on Billboard in 1989, and it's 33 million. Surely they must have more numbers than that somewhere. And I Don't Want to Live Without Your Love. I mean, there's no way in hell that should be a top 10 Chicago song, even though it was co-written by the great Albert Hammond, the less great Diane Warren, but even you can't deny she's great at what she does, and she was a massive hit maker, and they did well out of her. But look, if you come into Chicago and you scan through all these songs, beyond Saturday in the Park and 25 or 64, you're only getting one side of the story, and it's really not as big a part of the story as some people would tell you. Go back to the early albums. The first album's not even represented here. It had massive hits. Beginnings. Does anybody really know what time it is? Question 67 or 68. Not as big, but a great song. Peter Cetera vocal. Great horns right the way through it. Robert Lamb tune. So you're getting the best of, the whole band. So listen to albums. Listen to that debut. Listen to the second album, Chicago. Well, we call it Chicago 2 nowadays. When it was released, it was just called Chicago. That's where 25 or 64 originates. And then from there, go where you like. Some people will tell you that you can stop at Chicago 5. Some say Chicago 7. Some say Chicago 11, which is the last Terry Kath album. Like I said, I like 80s Chicago as well. But yeah, after Terry departed, they were never the same. And they acknowledge that. Yeah, this is actually quite sad. I'm upset. But that's also what I expected. All right, then, that was a quick look at Chicago's top 5 Spotify songs, and indeed their top 10 Spotify songs. And I was expecting it to be ballad heavy, but I really thought that more of the 70s hits would make it beyond. I mean, at least we did have 25 or 64 and Saturday in the Park in there, but even Just You and Me is missing. There's no way in hell that Just You and Me should have fewer streams than Look Away. Likewise, Old Days or Dialogue. I mean, that's a song that has complete relevance even in today's world over 50 years later. And of course, I do have a reaction to that song up on the channel, along with the songs from Chicago 7 and 8 and 17, and all sorts of other Chicago-y stuff, because I am a lifelong fan. I have been since my 8th birthday, when I got given the Best of Chicago on cassette and my very own cassette player to play it on. That was, at that point in time, pretty much the most exciting thing I'd ever received. So, yeah. But that best of was from the debut up to No Tell Love from Hot Streets in 78. So it didn't get into the 80s stuff, which was stuff that I was soon going to be hearing on the radio. After becoming a fan, the next new Chicago song I heard was Look Away. And Mum asked who it was, and I told her it's Chicago. I said, huh? Doesn't sound like them. And that was why. No horns. Champlin, a completely different singer from anybody who was on the classic era stuff, but still very successful. And unfortunately, they've kind of never escaped the 80s balladry. And, when record sales declined for all bands of their era in the 90s and beyond, a lot of bands went back to their classic sound. Chicago kind of made mention that they were doing that, but never quite got on with it. And albums like Chicago 30 were still laden with way too many sappy ballads. And it's a sad end to what was an extraordinary band, and who, throughout all of those changes and ups and downs, remain one of the greatest American bands ever, and yet also one of the most underrated. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my little trawl through their current Spotify rankings. Let me know your thoughts on the band and what you think the 10 songs are that people should be listening to represent all of Chicago. and I will point you to my Chicago playlist on one side of my head. So meanwhile, it's just thank you for watching today and bye for now, but not for long.
Acting is reacting. This does not mean acting again.